If there are places on earth where rich and poor, kind and cruel, educated and uneducated people are equalized, one of them is undoubtedly an emergency hospital. The people here are a mixed crowd, but with almost identical problems: serious illnesses, injuries, poisonings, and other ailments. An electric kettle, and a television. Needless to say, the nursing care in a first-class ward was also exceptional. However, the comforts of a prosperous life did not bring joy to Besanov, who felt deep in his soul that his days were numbered. A severe illness had reached its final stage and was now devouring his health with triple the appetite. Yet this wasn't what upset Lev Alexandrovich the most. It was the thought that everything he had achieved and earned with his knowledge and hard work would go to complete strangers. Part of his property he intended to bequeath to a local orphanage, the rest to distant cousins he barely knew, as well as to his household staff and personal driver. He had no closer heirs left. 3 years ago, his wife, who had constantly suffered from the misfortune that had struck their family, passed away. The grief was such that even thoughts of the event were torturous for the Besanovs. Their only daughter had disappeared. This happened more than 20 years ago when young Lev and Lena were traveling with their 6-year-old daughter Yulia from the dacha. At that time, the dacha was not a place of leisure for them but a significant support for the family budget. Tired from gardening, the parents hadn't noticed how they fell asleep. Yulia sat by the train window, but when her parents woke up, she was no longer there. They raised the alarm, involved the railway police, then still the militia, but all in vain. The girl was gone. Years later, Lev Alexandrovich begged his wife to have another child, but Lena, devastated by grief, could not find the strength to transfer her love from their lost daughter. The couple was incurably scarred by the tragedy. Lev Alexandrovich drowned his sorrow in intense work. A physicist by education, he knew several foreign languages, so in addition to science, he engaged in teaching, translating technical literature, and other work that brought in a good income. Over time, he was appointed head of the department and later its director. Frequent trips to international conferences and communication with foreign colleagues and the domestic scientific community became his escape, the sand in which he buried his head from the hovering family tragedy. Lena, on the contrary, left her job, entrusted household management to maids, and devoted herself to reading spiritual books and pilgrimages to holy places. After burying his wife, Lev Alexandrovich resisted for a long time. He continued to work diligently, write scientific papers, and exchange experiences with colleagues from abroad. Perhaps he didn't even realize he had amassed quite a significant fortune and real estate. Everything around him he considered the inevitable attributes of his position in society. Nothing more. When did he first think about his will? The bitter thought pierced his heart. God, who will I leave all this to? The big house with the estate, the 2 cars, one for him, one for his wife. Everything was just like his colleagues. Foreign guests were often entertained at home. The cars were used as needed. The sense of futility in everything he did and owned broke him. 2 heart attacks, one after another, gave him a new status, a second-degree disability, and the current third one turned out to be extensive. The prognosis was grim. Good morning, Mr. Recovering patient. Nurse Natasha entered the room with her usual cheerful smile. What would you like for breakfast today? We have a light fruit cottage cheese pudding and stewed fish with mashed potatoes. Lev Alexandrovich gazed wistfully out the window. What difference does it make what to have for breakfast? Today or tomorrow? Breakfasts would be unnecessary for him altogether. He longed for death to come quickly and erase everything. Out loud, he said, "Thank you, Natasha. I suppose I'll just have some tea, if I may." "No, you may not," the nurse responded playfully but firmly. "You need to regain your strength. You must eat. Come on." Lev Sergeyevich was embarrassed. He didn't want to appear like a spoiled rich man, so he said the first thing that came to mind. "All right, let's go with the casserole." Natalia, delighted that she had persuaded such a patient to have breakfast, dashed off, while Besanov sighed heavily again. Why did I live so long if I don't even have heirs? The persistent thought tormented him. Ah, too bad you can't lie in the grave before death. The heavy thoughts wouldn't leave him alone all day. He tried to distract himself by asking the nurse to turn on the television, but the news anchor's voice and the content of the reports only deepened his melancholy. "Why can't you just rest?" Natalia exclaimed in frustration. "You need peace, but you keep worrying about something. You can't go on like this." Lev Alexandrovich. Eventually, by evening, Besanov fell asleep. His sleep was light, faintly luminous, and slightly melancholic. His wife came to him in a dream, walking across a blooming meadow and beckoning him to follow her. Maybe it's time for me to join her, Lev thought in his dream. But then he saw his daughter Yulia at the edge of the meadow. She was stretching out her little hands to him and trying to pull him away from the magical field. Besanov leaned toward her, took her hand, and instantly felt the warmth of a child's palm. He opened his eyes. The nightlight in the room was on, and a little girl was indeed standing next to him, holding his hand. Lev Alexandrovich clutched his chest. Yulia. No, the girl replied. I'm Lena. There are so many rooms here, and I got lost. Besanov looked closely. A living girl, very much resembling his daughter, stood before his bed. Lena, Lev Alexandrovich exclaimed emotionally. How did you get here? I woke up, but my mom wasn't next to me. So, I grabbed my markers and went looking for her. The little girl was indeed clutching a bunch of colorful markers. You must really like drawing? Yes, she replied. I do. Nurse Tanya gave me the markers so I wouldn't cry. And why were you crying? He asked with pity. Because of this. The girl walked a few steps across the room, limping slightly on her left leg. The doctor said it's forever. Lev Alexandrovich clutched his chest again. My God. But why? The doctor said I needed a vaccine, but my mom didn't allow it. So that's how it is. Besanov sighed deeply. He quickly decided to change the subject. Maybe you could draw something for me. Lena? Of course, she replied happily, though I can only draw my mom. Nothing else. She grabbed a sheet of paper from the bedside table with his prescriptions and started drawing her mother on the back. When the drawing revealed a woman of indeterminate age with bright yellow hair, blue eyes, and vivid red lips, he couldn't help but smile. The little girl looked at him questioningly, and he quickly showered her with compliments. Your mom is beautiful, so young. That's not all, the girl said and began drawing a necklace around the woman's neck. She carefully drew each oval, slightly sticking out her tongue in concentration and furrowing her light eyebrows at the bridge of her nose. Besanov could hear her sniffling with effort and involuntarily smiled again. I haven't felt this good in a long time, he thought unexpectedly. Meanwhile, Lena finished the necklace and began drawing a pendant. Finally, she turned the paper toward Besanov. My sister. His head spun. His pulse quickened. He felt as though he was on the verge of another heart attack. The on-call nurse rushed in and immediately attached a medication vial to his foredrip, connected the system to the needle in Besanov's vein, and taped it in place. Then she started checking the monitors. Only then did she notice the girl in the room. And what are you doing here? She whispered angrily at the child. Go back to your ward. Lena, limping and almost in tears, backed toward the door but dropped her markers and started crying loudly. What on earth is going on? The nurse quickly gathered the markers off the floor, picked up the girl, and carried her out into the hallway. The child whimpered helplessly, murmuring, I don't know. What don't you know? Sweetie, I don't know where to go. I got lost. The nurse wiped her tears, set her down, and touched her leg. Wait here. I'll check the monitors and take you to pediatrics. All right? Lena nodded silently. When they returned her to her ward, there was already a commotion. The little patient had gone missing. Lena's mother was wringing her hands and crying loudly, ignoring the nurse's attempts to calm her. Other mothers peeked nervously out of their rooms. Seeing her daughter in the nurse's arms, the young woman instantly calmed down, ran over, and snatched the child as if she were being taken away. Lena, still sobbing, buried her face in her mother's shoulder. The next morning, Natalia didn't recognize her terminally ill patient. He greeted her with a joyful smile and conspiratorial sparkle in his eyes. Glad to see you in good spirits. Lev Alexandrovich, are you feeling better today? Natalia, I'll tell you even more. Today is a special day for me, but please, help me not to ruin it. Of course, Lev Alexandrovich. What do you need me to do? Natalia asked hesitantly. Please, go to the children's ward and find this lady. He showed her a drawing of a woman and continued. Yesterday, her daughter Lena, a little girl with a limp, wandered into my room after getting lost in the corridors. She drew this picture of her mother for me. I need to meet this woman. Natalia examined the drawing, surprised. A mother, just like any other, she thought. Children usually draw them this way. But she took the portrait and headed to the children's ward. When Lena's mother entered the room, carrying her daughter, Lev Alexandrovich was already propped up in bed with 2 pillows behind his back. The woman wore a hospital robe, so the pendant that had piqued Besanov's interest was not visible. He stared at her, as if trying to recall something. Finally, he couldn't hold back and asked, "Could you show me the pendant around your neck?" She pulled out the chain and stepped closer. Besanov gasped when he saw it, a four-leaf onyx clover set in silver. "Yulia!" he exclaimed involuntarily. The woman flinched and looked closely at Lev Alexandrovich's face. "Actually, my name is Anastasia," she said, "but I do remember that my parents used to call me Yulia when I was very young." "My girl," he murmured, "you've been found at last." Still confused, Anastasia glanced at her daughter, who stood in the middle of the room. The little girl pointed at Besanov and said, "That's the grandpa I told you about yesterday." Anastasia looked intently at his face again. "Are you saying I'm your daughter?" "Most likely, yes," he said with a trembling voice. "Do you remember how you got lost?" "Of course," Anastasia admitted. "We were on a train. My parents fell asleep, and some traveling musicians passed through the carriage. A boy with a puppy beckoned me to follow him. I got up and went after them." Lev Alexandrovich clutched his head. "Oh, my God, to sleep through my own child, to lose a lifetime." Yulia continued, "When we got off the train, they took me to a small room, fed me, and dressed me in different clothes. When I saw the new clothes, I thought they'd take my pendant too, so I quietly took it off and hid it in my mouth. I kept it hidden like that for years." "Didn't you cry? Didn't you miss us?" Besanov asked. "I cried, but they told me, you saw it yourself, your parents died on the train. You're an orphan now." "Poor girl," Besanov sighed. "And how was your life with them?" "Like everyone else's," she said bitterly. "They made me beg on trains." "What a nightmare," Besanov kept repeating. Yulia pressed her lips together. "Then they sold me to some sect members. They were crazy. I even reported them to the police later. They made us fast and pray for days. The only good thing was they taught me to read. When I turned 15, they brought me to their chief priest and added me to his harem. I worked in his library, read a lot of books. He told us we were supposed to give birth to real people and wipe out everyone else on earth. I never read such nonsense in any book. They took our sons as soon as we stopped nursing them, saying they needed male upbringing. Daughters were allowed to stay until they turned 15. Many children were often sick or died because they weren't vaccinated. They said vaccines made children impure. That's why my Lena didn't get vaccinated and caught polio. When we escaped, she was all curled up like in a spasm. We ran out of the forest onto a road, and an ambulance happened to pass by. Thank God they stopped and brought us here." "It can't be," Besanov whispered, stunned. "We found each other after all." Then, with a glimmer of hope, he asked, "Do you remember us? Your mom and me, at least a little?" "Very faintly," Yulia replied. "But I remember my mom Lena well. She was beautiful and kind. Does she visit here?" "Oh, my dear, she only visits in dreams now. She passed away from grief, suffered for more than 20 years and couldn't take it anymore, and I got sick and was ready to die. But now I don't want to at all." "Lena," he turned to the little girl, "so you were named after your grandmother?" He stretched out his arms to her. The girl, looking at her mother for approval, came closer. "All right, my girls," Besanov said decisively. "I have to get better, and then we'll all go home together. You'll see how wonderful it is there, so many rooms, a garden, and even a little pond in the yard." Lena blinked her eyes, listening to him with an open mouth. Yulia nervously stroked the pendant, unsure of what to say. Finally, she asked, "What's so special about this necklace?" "Oh, it's an antique, pre-revolutionary, though it looks simple. Your great-grandmother gave it to your mom as a talisman, saying onyx is a powerful stone. Your mom gave it to you when you were very sick." Yulia finally began to understand what was happening. "It's amazing that Lena decided to draw me wearing this pendant. I only started openly wearing it here in the hospital. It seems that without it, we wouldn't have met." Besanov smiled. "From now on, let's agree, you'll call me Dad, and Lena will call me Grandpa Lev. Deal?" Yulia and Lena exchanged glances and, as if on cue, rushed to hug him because no one on earth was dearer to them. Lev Alexandrovich sprang into action, arranging for Lena's condition to be evaluated. Though her disability wasn't covered under standard care, he paid for the necessary treatments, which promised nearly a full recovery. Within 6 months, at Lena's birthday celebration, no one could remember how awkwardly she used to walk.